What is up, fight fans? It is time for the MMA plug presented to you by Mile High Sports. I'm your host, Jordan Kurtz. You can give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. Guys, we've got a lot of things to be able to dive into today. But first and foremost, I want to give a shout out to everybody here at the number 38 presented by Volo, holding us down with the studio each and every week. And as always, have to give a shout out to my man, Danny Bailey, behind the boards, holding it down for me. The rest of the Mile High Sports crew is doing incredible things right now. Just had my man Sean leave the office. Sean Drotar, one of the premier guys here on the Denver sports scene. Cody Rourke doing incredible work right now, covering the Broncos out there. Watch his segments, What the Football, or his Broncos in the morning, his chat that he has each and every day that he puts out there for social media. It's tremendous content out there for you guys to be able to dive into what has been one of the greatest few weeks of a run for Denver sports in quite some time. See, we're not going to talk too much about them right now. You know, they're a little bit of a thing, but if we're talking about the professional sports scene right now, you have the Broncos sitting at 9-2. And one of the things that I love the most about this right now with the Broncos excelling is each and every week having to watch all of these so-called experts from all these other platforms out there have to eat crow after the Broncos go out there and just keep finding ways to win. Again, they are 9-2. Their two combined losses are of a total of 4 points, 2 plays away, mind you, from being 11-0. Then you have these bozos out there, that little weasel Nick gets it anything but right, who tries to walk back his comments without doing it each and every week, said that the Broncos were going to finish in the cellar of the division this year. Well, how's that taste, Nick? Because I feel like that victory, whenever you have the Broncos being able to win these high-level division matchups, especially against a team like the Chiefs at home, those are confidence builders. And in some of these games, yeah, you can say that they aren't the most stellar performances. They aren't lighting up the scoreboard or the stat sheet or anything like that. But does that matter when it comes to the playoffs? Does that matter when it comes time to winning when it matters the most? The Denver sports crowd has rallied back. It is truly the Orange Crush of old. The other day, you could see the cameras rattling on every third down when it came to the gameplay. Yeah, KC had their time of being the loudest stadium out there, but for the longest time, it exchanged back and forth for who was being the loudest stadium that's out there. And the Broncos faithful, they showed up and they absolutely played a factor in that game. And oh yeah, let's not forget the fact that they've had some decimating injuries that have hit the team, still find ways to win. They played 6 games within 29 days, still continue to find ways to win. There's a bye this week, so they get a chance to have a little bit of R&R, and then they'll be back next week and ready to take on that final push of the regular season. You have the Avs on fire. They are tearing it up right now. The Nuggets are rolling. They're in like that, whatever the new format. I don't follow the NBA aside from what I see from some of these guys, but they got that city tournament thing, whatever, blah, 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 that's going on. So if you're into basketball, make sure that you check those guys out for the best coverage that you can possibly find here on the local front. We also have new magazine drop that just came out, the Winter Sports Edition with Bruce Brown as well as Gabriel Landeskog. You have the captain right over there. You know, Landeskog has just been one of those staples of the Avalanche for quite some time now, and his story is just of stalwart toughness that has been able to come back amidst adversity. And again, these are great editions of this magazine here. Also, there's a feature that you can find with our friend of the program who was on these airwaves just a few weeks ago in Reagan Upshaw. So check all that out. Again, this is down at the number 38. There's merch available as well. We have a vending machine on demand for you to get whatever you want. Make sure that you check these guys out here. Hit that like, share, and subscribe wherever possible. On the local front, we have the Colorado Rundown. As always, guys, if you have the chance to buy tickets in person from the competitors on these shows, that is greatly appreciated. That helps them with their ticket commission. It also saves you a few bucks and not having to pay online processing fees, so on and so forth. We have CJJC that is coming up on December 6th. That's CJJC 28 Grapple Party that's happening at the Stampede. It's going to be a grappling matinee. Come out. We have a stacked card. We have UFC vets. We have some top-tier grapplers. There is going to be a show that you do not want to miss if you're a fan of the grappling world going down. The following weekend, you have 5280 Muay Thai also going down as a matinee at the Stampede. That same weekend, there's going to be a Sparta show as well. Come out and support these local athletes as much as you possibly can. And rounding out the year for events, we have Colorado Combat Club wrapping it up on December 20th. That is a show that is going to be fireworks. It's going to be a holiday send-off for everybody for this final frame of 2025. Come and check us out there. You can follow CO Combat Club on Instagram, and you could find all the links that you need for the stream, to tickets, so on and so forth there. But again, our fighters do have tickets in hand. So if you have the opportunity for whether it's CJJC or some of these other shows, I know the tickets are going fast for a couple of them. So if you have the chance, please come out and support us. It is greatly appreciated. Your support of local combat sports is what allows us to continue to put on these shows and be able to help grow the sport as a whole and amplify the careers and platforms of our athletes on this scene. As a note that we've kind of talked about of going to potentially be happening those first couple of weeks of December, I got word that it is no longer happening. We will not be having a bare knuckle fight championship card happening in December. So more on that for whenever they come back. But wrapping that up for the Colorado rundown, that transitions us into the weekend recap. Guys, last week, I told you that there was no chance that this card was going to be a dud. There are too many high-level matchups, too many big names in high-stakes situations for this not to deliver. I get that there's going to be some people out there that have their detractions for what the main and co-main event were, that they say that, oh, they didn't tune in to watch a grappling snooze fest and you're just watching someone play the safe route for 25 minutes. Well, it's also on the other person to have the technical prowess and the execution to be able to get up from those bad positions. In the main event, you had Islam Makhachev make history by becoming the 11th double champion in UFC history as he defeated Jack Della Maddalena. Now, you have to feel for Jack. Really, you do. Jack is still in his 20s. He earned a UFC world championship. But man, what a poor draw of straws to have your first title defense against Islam Makhachev, an all-time great. We're going to talk a little bit more about Islam later in the program, but this was a situation where Islam was just so far ahead and just so much better in that fight than what Jack had to offer. And you could see it in Jack's face in between rounds 4 and 5. Islam broke him. He straight up broke Jack Della Maddalena. Jack had a look of just pure frustration, disappointment. You know, the internet memes are cruel out there, but they weren't necessarily far off. It looked like Jack was going to go cry in the car. A lot of the analogies toward like Friday with Red and Debo, that, you know, it wasn't far off. And, you know, it's unfortunate that had to be the situation for Jack. You had his cornerman, his head coach in between that 4th and 5th round telling him to get that look off of his face. So it wasn't just us from home that was interpreting that bad body language or the facial expressions. It was also noted and pointed out by his coach. Now, on the side of coaching for Jack, there's been some detractions as well for the advice or lack thereof that he was given. It was a lot more rah-rah pep talk versus actual tactical X's and O's. You can make of that what you will for how the approach was. I just don't think that Jack had the skill set to be able to get up from Islam as soon as he secured those takedowns. The tactical approach that Islam had also has to be recognized and marveled at. What was one of the things that he did so well early on in that fight? Well, he attacked the lead leg. Jack's best tool is his boxing. Well, if he can't drive or if he can't step forward with any sort of force or weight on his lead leg because it's getting chopped out from underneath him, and then being forced to switch stances so that it makes the takedown that much easier for Islam, That's tactics. That's approach. That's game plan and preparation with the discipline that was stuck to from the Makhachev camp. Again, a very tough draw for Jack to be able to pull, or for him to have to pull Islam on a historic run at this stage. Islam now has tied Anderson Silva for win streak coming into the, when Anderson first came in. And then Islam has now matched that with his win streak since the Adriano Martins fight. Sugar Sean O'Malley had a pretty, I guess, funny or comedic bit, whatever, if you will, on his podcast recapping the fight. He said, hey, how bad does that suck for Jack that has to be the first guy that you get in a title defense? Said, hey, I won the title and my first defense was Cheeto. Ha 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 ha. So when we're comparing those, yeah, it was a much more favorable matchup for somebody like Sean in his first defense as opposed to Jack. But that's just the luck of the draw there. And yes, Islam doesn't have to cut a whole ton of weight to be able to make 70. Going up to 85, that may be a stretch. You know, some people are saying, oh, could he be the guy to go on and potentially challenge Hamzat? Well, he already went up 15 pounds for this fight. Let's let him get a couple of title defenses and clear out what has been one of the most bountiful crops of talent at 170 pounds in quite some time. For years, it was log jammed at the top at welterweight. We spoke about it many times on this program with the political tactics or the stalling or the lack of taking matchups with certain guys like Colby to Tyron Woodley, Usman's reign, then Leon, and so on and so forth. There was a little bit of log jamming for a while that happened at 170 pounds. Right now, though, as evidenced by the showcase of welterweights that we had on the card the other night, along with another high-profile welterweight matchup that's happening this weekend that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. And then you have Kamaru Usman, who's sitting out there, who Islam is saying that that's who he would like to fight next because of what the legacy would mean, beating a former champion who had the run that Kamaru did. Then, he lost to Usman, but you also have to recognize that Buckley is a talent that's out there that is a very viable prospect at 170 as well. Right now, though, Islam is the king of that division. You could say whatever you want, Ilia Topuria. The more and more that time grows on, the more and more I believe that Islam would win that fight. And it just points me back to that first fight with Volkanovski. And it begs the question, just how damn good is Alexander Volkanovski to have been able to put up that fight that was a splitting hairs decision between the two of them? That many thought that Islam could have very well lost that fight on the cards, but again, a close 48-47 decision in that particular matchup. In the co-main event, you had technical mastery from Valentina Shevchenko. I believe that skill for skill, Valentina Shevchenko is the greatest woman to ever step into the octagon. Skill for skill, the depth of her arsenal is something that nobody else has brought to the table. Now, in some of these latter stages of her career, has she had maybe a little bit more of a conservative approach? Sure. But I also believe that that's on you to game plan for. If you know that what her route to victory or what she's going to choose to do and making that business decision as a champion to make sure that she walks out with that same 12 pounds of gold on her waist that she came into that fight with, when you know that she's going to be aiming for the takedown or she's going to try to draw the pressure out of you to find her fit in, take you down, and then get to a crucifix position and work with her ground and pound or camp from guard and just stay busy. If you know that that's the case, or if that's so much of the book that's written on her, stop it. Don't allow it to happen. Game plan for it. Until you can prove that you can stop her doing what she does best. And from her standpoint, from a career and longevity perspective, why would she go and put herself in the line of fire and go have a barn burner firefight if she does not need to? Some people coming into the matchup thought that, oh, well, Weili might have the strength or the wrestling ability to be able to get back up or to not stay in some of those positions. That was not at all the case. Valentina showed why weight classes exist in that fight. She took Weili down at will. She held her down for, the majority of the 25-minute contest. Valentina just completely blanked her as a purely dominant 50-45 matchup. So when we're talking about dominance, when we're talking about somebody who is the top of the top, it is her. Yeah, some people will give Amanda the GOAT status because she had the 2 belts. She does have the wins over Valentina, which one of those was a very controversial decision. But nonetheless, give credit to Amanda, and she does have a little bit more of a tendency to go lioness with the firefight and blitz somebody and knock them out. But Valentina doesn't have to take those risks to stay champion, to remain on the throne. So again, you can complain all you want about her not being entertaining, about her making the business decision to wrestle and to choose to grapple over entertaining striking sequences. But at the end of the day, that's your opinion. And you can choose whether you want to rally behind her and support her or not, or you can appreciate the greatness and the dominance that she puts forth. That's what it comes down to. Another title defense for the Bullet, Valentina Shevchenko. In the feature fight, we're seeing a true thoroughbred blue chip prospect in Michael Morales, folks. Michael Morales is a young kid still on the bright side of 25, who is now 19-0, who is in title contention talk. He went out there and he dispatched of Sean Brady within the first round. And, Sean Brady, credit to him for taking the fight and not sitting out waiting for his title shot or just sitting around. Sean Brady said that he absolutely wanted to go earn his shot and stay active in the process. Well, sometimes when you roll the dice, it comes up snake eyes. And in this case, Michael Morales is the real deal. Now, I don't know if he gets the next title shot with Praches out there in the mix, with Usman being in the talks from Islam directly, with Ian Gary fighting this weekend. Should he have an impressive performance over Bilal? There's a lot of different moving parts right now, but there's options of qualified personnel at 170 right now. Maybe based on age, maybe based on potential and upside still, you give him a title eliminator before he gets into the actual title fight, just to allow his star power, if you will, to grow a little bit more, to let him be a little bit more of a household name. Go give him one of these vets at the top of the division where he can potentially build his name off of them a little bit more in the process. I'm not Mick Maynard or Hunter Campbell or Sean Shelby in this process of matchmaking, but I would consider that approach just based off of how much time you have left on the clock with this kid, as well as the options that you have available with some, dare I say, or not dare I say it, just a simple fact. You have people who have a bigger draw or move the needle a little bit more with the fans right now. Carlos Praches being one of them. Carlos Praches, the way that he dispatched of Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards had never been knocked out like that. He straight up sent Rocky to the place where time does not exist. Leon got a little bit sloppy with his footwork in the second round when he clipped him with that straight left, which was shot like a piston right through his face. Leon was moving straight backwards. His feet were straight together, and he got put out. We spoke about it last week on the program that Leon has not looked like champion level Leon since he lost it. And that followed through again with this fight. That's now 3 in a row. What's next for Leon? I'm not sure. On a different note, Leon can't have friends. There's no way that his friends or his circle really is for him. They'd have told him to buzz his hair. He's got LeBron James level receding hair with a bald spot in the back that it's damn near touching at this point. If you had real friends, my brother, they would tell you just to buzz it. Because would you go to the barbershop and just say, mess me up? I don't know. Completely different topic. But if we're talking about another spectacular finish, and this one came quick, we did mention a little bit last week that Beneil Dariush has been chinny. He's been chinned a few times and knocked out quick in a few fights throughout his career. You had obviously one of the most relevant on the local side of things knockout that he suffered to Alexander the Great Ape Hernandez in Alex's UFC debut. He had the knockout that immediately happened in the fight against Arman Tsarukyan, which Arman fights this week. More on Arman later. And then this matchup, a left hook in 16 seconds against Benoit Saint-Denis. Benoit Saint-Denis is inching his way closer toward the top of the division at 155 pounds. Now, he was asking for a title shot, given the discount double check Aaron Rodgers belt motion after he got the knockout. But I got to say, you pump the brakes on this one for a second there, BSD, because there are guys who are at the top of the division who are just further along toward the title shot than you are right now. Is he on the cusp? Sure. I'll give him that. But he's not there yet. He's not that next guy who I believe is in contention to fight for that 155-pound title against Ilia Topuria. Just don't see him being the next guy. The next matchup after that, what was the question that I posed to you guys last week about Bo Nickel? I asked, how does Bo respond to taking his first loss? How does Bo respond to the adversity that he faced from a striking perspective against RDR? And what did he do in preparation to be able to go out there and get his hand raised in victory? Well, he answered all of those questions because Bo Nickel looked like a man possessed the other night. You have to give your credit to him in that matchup because the way that he went out there and fought with intent against Rodolfo Vieira, who is also a world champion jiu-jitsu competitor, the way that he went out there and knocked him out cold with the head kick, that showed that Bo has made a lot of necessary adjustments in his camp. Bo put up a video this last week of him going and training in the gi. He said, this is, my first time training in the gi and just trying to grow the skill set and evolve as a martial artist and continue to push myself to those next levels. Well, when you have a guy who's one of the greatest American wrestlers of his generation, coupled with the striking development and other elements of submission grappling being introduced or added to his repertoire, that does have the makes of being a problem. The performance that he showed the other night is the guy that Bo spoke about himself being some fights ago, where he said that, oh yeah, he is a world beater. He is a guy who could go challenge for the title. I don't think he's there quite yet from a striking perspective to really push against Khamzat. But if we're talking about who is, from a grappling pedigree standpoint, who is the best guy to potentially go give Khamzat a run for his money, who is probably the only guy at 185 pounds who can wrestle with Khamzat Chimaev, I challenge you to find me a better option than Bo Nickel. Again, striking is a completely different element of that. But if we're talking the dominant wrestling that Khamzat used to be able to go win that title, there is not a snowball's chance in hell that Khamzat will be able to just blanket Bo Nickel the way that he did DDP. No chance. What's next for Bo? I'm really excited to see how he puts together his next fight. What's the next matchup for him? And what are the evolutions of growth that he continues to display as the time grows forward? The following matchup from that, we said that this was all of the makings of being a banger with Gregory Hobocop Rodriguez as well as Roman Kopylov. It was. These guys, how one person didn't fall throughout that contest is insane to me because they hit each other so hard at certain points and they just both kept marching forward. That was a true battle of Terminators who were just swinging fists, legs, shins, elbows, everything in the process. And just happened to be one of those nights where nobody fell. Tremendously entertaining fight between the two of them. Gregory Hobocop Rodriguez picks up the victory there. But Roman Kopylov certainly showed himself well in that matchup. The next one was a rematch from back in the Invicta days. And this was a matchup that drew a lot of ire from the online community and critics out there saying that the UFC did nothing to promote Aaron Blanchfield in this matchup against Tracy Cortez, whereas Tracy was being put on the pedestal and marketed absolutely everywhere. Now, you're not wrong in saying that there was an unbalanced level of promotion between the two of them for this fight, but some of that also has to deal with who moves the needle. Seriously. Go back, and if you were to look at the media day insights, above the champions, above the title fights, above anybody else on the main card for that matter, Tracy Cortez's content did more numbers than everybody else on the card. So from the outlets or the brands who are doing these activations and little capsules and complex interviews and so on and so forth, being that you're in the media capital of America in New York City, which you could also say maybe that added some distractive elements for Tracy in the process. But it's no surprise as to why they took one of the, objectively speaking, hottest chicks on the entire roster with the most marketability that is bilingual and markets to multiple audiences, who does massive numbers. ESPN themselves a few weeks back used her on a post for just regular ESPN content to be able to drive their numbers up, not just on the UFC side of things. That's the outlets understanding who drives the numbers, who moves the needle. So you can't completely fault the outlets from that perspective either. And it's not trying to slight Aaron Blanchfield, but she doesn't have the same marketability the way that Tracy does. Is she a tremendously talented fighter? 100%. Is she somebody who is on the outside looking in of a potential title fight? Yes, she is. But in some of these things, again, it's more than just the X's and O's and the tactician that is in the octagon itself. Some of it does come down to marketability. Some of it does come down to the ability to relate and connect with fans or to push numbers, which translate into dollars for all of these platforms who are on a pay-per-click type of model. It's not surprising to see that Tracy got the rub. Now, she did get submitted by a rear naked choke in the second round. So they're 1-1 against each other. Maybe they run it back somewhere down the way. But Tracy's never lost 2 fights in a row in her career. So we'll have to see how this shapes up for her as time grows forward. The next matchup, this was one that, a lot of people thought was definitely an upset, with Malcolm Wellemaker taking on Ethan Ewing. Ethan Ewing took the fight on all of, I believe it was less than 48 hours notice, had just won the A1 title out west, and then flies across the country, makes weight, takes on one of the highest hype prospects, the undefeated Malcolm Wellemaker, excuse me. But for Wellemaker, sometimes having all of those shifts last second, that can also play a role for you, especially when you're as young as he is. It was something that factored in for him. He was in a fight that ended up being much tougher than what he expected. Anthony Lionheart Smith once said, that is the worst position that you could find yourself in as a fighter, is that once you're actually in the cage, oh no, the scrap is much harder than what you had anticipated going into it. It's not like he got blanked. He didn't get finished or anything along those lines. But he did lose unanimously on the cards. You can say, oh, well, maybe that was the fight of Ewing's life, the fight of his career, whatever. Well, you know what? He had the biggest fight of his career on the biggest stage possible on Madison Square Garden. That's something that you have to give credit to him for. The kid wasn't 8-2 coming into the fight, just winning a regional title for no reason. He does have ability behind him to go out there and showcase a well-rounded skill set, and he used multiple different approaches to be able to win that fight. Wellmaker will bounce back. He's a young kid who has a lot of promise, but are there some holes that maybe got exposed a little bit, or some flaws and deficiencies in his game when you can't just go out there and spark somebody right there in the first round? Yes. It's now, for Malcolm Wellmaker, the same discussion that we were having about Bo Nickel of what can you do with that intel that you took from that loss to be able to take the next steps and grow toward being closer to a final product? What can you do to make the adjustments to grow as a fighter and a martial artist collectively to put yourself in better positions of success in the future? The next matchup was Kyle Daukaus against Gerald Meerschaert. Now, this was another moment where DC drives me up a freaking wall sometimes with some of the stuff that he says. DC makes the comment, "Oh, who would have thought that Daukaus was going to jump on the Darce choke?" His nickname is the Darce Knight. What do you think is one of his bread and butter submissions? Come on, man. That just is another tally in the column for DC not doing homework and just writing off of who he is. All respect to what he did as a competitor, but on the headset, he drives me up a wall sometimes with some of the things like that he says. The next matchup, you had a scrap between Pat Sabatini and Chepe Mariscal. Pat Sabatini got the win in this one. They are now 1-1 against each other. I would potentially imagine that as they both grow toward the top of that 145-pound division, that there may very well be a trilogy fight somewhere down the way in the future. One last one that we're going to talk about before we move along to the next segment. We had Baisinger Susarkayev, who picked up the win by right hook against Eric Makhachev. There was maybe a point where Baisinger looked a little bit tired, but I don't know if that's just his nonchalant approach or if he actually was a little bit winded. Nevertheless, he went out there and he punched Makhachev's lights out, gets a huge finish in that third round. And that's a kid who he's a disciple of Hamzat. He does most of his training down at Kill Cliff in Florida, is a guy who has the tutelage of Robbie Lawler, one of the greatest to ever do it. This is a kid who you need to look out for. He is now 11-0 with 10 finishes. That's a prospect that you have to keep your eyes on. Switching things up here, we have a UFC Fight Night breakdown to bring you from across the pond. It's going down over in Qatar this week. You have a lightweight showcase. In the main event, you have Arman Tsarukyan taking on Dan the Hangman Hooker. By all conventional means of analysis and evaluation for this fight, you say that Arman wins, right? I mean, he's 22-3. He's more explosive. He's got tremendous grappling. He has knockouts like against the fight with Beneil that speak to some of his top end capabilities. But Dan Hooker is a psycho. And when it's a fist fight, you can't count Dan Hooker out. And you take that psycho moniker from all of his city kickboxing teammates out there who said that, no, if you get into a firefight, Dan Hooker is going to swing with the best of them. And he may not always come out on top, but damn it, is he willing to go step into the flame and be the man in the arena to take the chance to be great. Dan Hooker himself said, yeah, Arman probably does more technical training, probably does more recovery work, probably drinks less beers, probably pays more attention to his recovery work. But this is a fight. Again, I'm not willing to write Dan Hooker off in this matchup, but you know, the smart lean in this is absolutely for Arman. But I also love the angle that Dan Hooker's taking on. He's like, hey, man, this dude grew up in silk sheets, which is true. I mean, Arman is publicly known that he's rich outside of fighting. I don't know how much that factors in for this fight, but we do know that Arman broke in the process of trying to make weight for his title shot against Islam, which got pulled out, and that's why he hasn't had a title shot since. We'll have to see how this plays out once it comes time on Saturday. The co-main event matchup, you could see a big step up in terms of the title talks or where he sits in terms of the hierarchy with Ian Gary. Ian Machado Gary takes on Bilal, Bully B, remember the name, whatever nickname you want to have for him. Forget the name, some people say. Bilal Muhammad. Bilal is a former UFC champion. A win over a former champion is something that is absolutely a resume bolster if you're Ian. On the flip side, if Bilal is able to go out there and get the job done against Ian, he kind of reinserts himself in the discussion toward being one of those top contenders there at 170 pounds. But if we're being completely honest, I think that Ian is just going to be too fast for Bilal. Ian doesn't have great power, but he does have great timing and precision. That being said, I think that Ian has the tools to be able to get it done against Bilal. You have a 205 matchup between a couple of heavy hitters in Vulcan one-time Ozdemir taking on Alonzo Menefield. I don't foresee this fight going the distance. You have two guys who throw with bad intentions at times to their own detriment where they get tired from punching themselves out. But if either one of them connect, it's lights out. Moving on from that, we have the return of Jack Hermanson. Jack the Joker, this is a guy who has a tremendous grappling repertoire. Jack is going down. He's competing at 170 pounds, and he's taken on Miktabek Orba. Miktabek has had some tremendous fights in the UFC so far. That is a guy who comes from Kyrgyzstan. He's just got an it factor about him in terms of grit and toughness. He's put on a couple of banger wars already. He had a huge fight out here in Colorado for the LFA a couple of years back where he had a textbook uppercut knockout against Hayward Charles and Vail. I'm interested to see how his power does against somebody who is coming down in weight in Jack, and what does Jack look like now in this situation? Got a heavyweight matchup between the Polar Bear, Sergey Spivak, taking on Shamil Gaziev. Entertainment-wise, I don't really have the brightest prospects for this one. This is a couple of guys who have a more grapple-heavy style in the process. Gaziev is 14-1. Give him his credit there. Spivak has had his ups and downs, but has some good wins in the process. Good chance that this is some titty bumping. Next fight, though, in the flyweight division, want to give a shout out to my man, my former roommate, Alex Perez. He is taking on Alsu Umabayev. He's a kid who has a lot of bright potential in this flyweight division. He's coming into the contest at a 22-3 record. Alex being the former title challenger, sitting at 25-9. Alex has had to deal with some unfortunate injuries throughout the last couple of years, but if we have a healthy Alex Perez, he's a problem to deal with in there. And as far as the grappling, I think he can wrestle with Almabayev no problem. It's a matter of who can get to their position first. I think it's going to be a positional race, and if Alex is healthy, I think he's going to be a tough puzzle to solve for Almabayev. You've got a featherweight matchup between Luke Riley and Bogdan Grad. Luke Riley is one of those guys who cut his teeth through the Cage Warriors promotion over there in England. He's coming into the fight at 11-0. He's a young prospect with a lot of promise. This has all the makings of being a pretty banger matchup. Another couple to hit just before we move on to the next segment here. You have Kyoji Horiguchi back in the mix. He's taken on Tagir Ulanbekov. For a long time, Kyoji Horiguchi was the best guy, one of the best guys, I should say, at 125 and 135 outside of the UFC. He had his run in the UFC earlier on in his career, went on to pursue other opportunities, made a lot of money in Bellator and in Ryzen, was a champion in other places out there, and now he's back. I'm interested to see how he does against somebody who is a rising talent and prospect in Tagir Ulanbekov. Tagir, part of that same Eagle camp with Habib, Islam, so on and so forth. It's going to be a tough fight on both sides. Then we have to talk about Bezkat Almakhan. He's taken on the brother of current UFC lightweight champion Ilia Topuria in Alexandre Topuria. Topuria is, he has tremendous Greco. You saw his big takedown slam that he had. He 5-pointed a guy in his last fight. It's not going to be an easy road for somebody in his position where you're always going to be constantly compared to your brother. You're always going to have those whispers and people saying, oh, but he's not Ilya. It's a matter of how he's able to manage those talks or how much he can block that out to go out there and fight his fight, because he is a really talented kid. But I do agree with the assessment. He's not Ilya, but he is really good. One last matchup to talk about before we move along here. I just think that an entertaining matchup that you're going to have is what's scheduled so far as the second fight on the card. Saigir Ismailov. I'm butchering that one. There's way too many G's, H's, and Z's and V's across that one for me to get it right. But he's 22-2, Russian kid coming in there fighting Nicholas Dalby. If we know anything about a Nicholas Dalby fight, he comes in there, he looks like a Viking, he fights like a terrorizer. He's going to kill or be killed in his matchups. That makes for an entertaining matchup. Styles make fights. Moving along from that, we're going to talk about, for just a second here, just how good is Islam Makhachev? Where do you guys rank him on your GOAT list already? You could let me know on social media. Hit me up on Instagram or on Threads at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. Just how good is Islam Makhachev? Because when we look at the run that he's had, it's one of the greatest of the modern era. People will always take the detraction of him having that loss against Adriano Martins where he got clipped. Sure, that's valid. But it's not like he got walked down and completely dominated en route to being finished. No, he got clipped in the first round. And some of that was he was earlier on in his career and he's more willing to trade some stuff on the feet, and he's a better striker than his predecessor, Habib. I think that in terms of a complete skill set, he's a more complete fighter, and he's got a better resume now at this point than what Habib does. It's not to take away from the greatness that Habib achieved. Retired at 29-0. Did have, I believe, 3 successful title defenses or unanimous title defenses. He did beat 3 of the biggest names in the division in the notorious Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje. It's not to remove the luster from any of those wins, but as far as the full-rounded skill set that Islam has had, the title defenses, and then now going up a weight class and capturing a second belt, Islam is in that GOAT discussion. He may not be a Mount Rushmore guy just yet, but he is still in his prime and dominating fights. He goes out there and has a couple of title defenses against some of this crop of welterweights that we spoke of earlier. How do you not include him as a part of that greatest of all time discussion? I think he's already in that mix. And when it's all said and done, where does he rank on the list at the end? Again, he's tied with Anderson Silva's win streak record. goes out there and wins again, that puts him in the pole position for a very prestigious honor. Goes and has a couple of wins against highly touted prospects. And even if he goes and has a continued run where he clears out some of these top guys at 170, he could very well usurp the top of that mountain and be the guy who sits on the throne of the greatest of all time. Some people will be naysayers toward that statement and say, oh, and some fights stylistically where, like this last one where he pretty much just wrestle left Jack the entire time. Sure, you're not wrong in that. But again, when we're talking about dominance, every champion, every great champion that the who's who of people puts on the top of that list had business decision fights. Whether it be certain matchups that John had to Anderson in the fights against guys like Talis Latis and Damian Maia. A couple of those were some of the most hated title fight performances that fans had. George St. Pierre had a couple of those. So again, every champion at certain points, they have those business decision fights where when you are the champion, the number one most important thing is walking out with that same 12 pounds of gold that you walked into the octagon with that night. Entertainment can come second when you're the champion. If you're not in the title fight picture, if you're not in a title fight, well then yeah, I understand going for the thrill, going to entertain and trying to be that guy who woos and moves the fans. The stakes are just so much higher when there's championship gold on the line. The money, the recognition, the PR machine that fuels the UFC. All of those things are factors that have to be considered when you are in the title fight position. And I don't blame any fighter who has a superior grappling skill set, who has the ability to take somebody down and hold them against their will, and that person on the bottom can do absolutely nothing about it. Why would you take the risk? Why would you risk losing your title? Why would you risk losing that fight if you're the challenger for a title and you can do what Khamzat did to DDP? If you can do what Islam Makhachev did to Jack Della Maddalena? If you can take a low-risk approach to where you basically took no damage and preserve that time on the clock for your chin, why? Why would you go out there and give somebody like Jack, who his best route of victory is by striking and by allowing his boxing to unfold? Why would you give him that opportunity and give him his highest probability of winning when you can take a different approach and you have all the odds in your favor and can cruise to a victory? That's on the opponent to be able to stop it. It's just like people who want to argue about other elements in sports, people who complain for whatever reasons about the tush push that the Eagles would run in football. Well, if you know the game plan or if you know the play, stop it. Game plan for it. Figure out how to beat them in that position. But circling it back to Islam, Islam is fulfilling the prophecy of Father's plan to its full potential. And if you're not familiar with what Father's plan was, the original trainer of Habib and Islam, all the way back to when they were kids back in Dagestan, was Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov, Habib's father. Abdulmanap was also a highly accomplished martial artist himself. There's videos out there of Abdulmanap in sambo matches beating Fedor, who many consider to be the greatest heavyweight of all time. Abdulmanap had the vision that Habib was the first coming of this wave, and he was going to go out, dominate, be champion. And the plan was for Habib to get to 30 fights and be undefeated and walk off. Obviously, Abdulmanap's unfortunate passing due to Rona in 2020 cut that a little bit short. Habib took one more fight following that. That was the fight against Justin Gaethje, where then he laid down the gloves and retired, said he made a promise to his mother that he is not going to fight again beyond that, and he's held to that promise. The next portion or the next sequence of Father's plan was Islam coming in and taking over the division and basically having the baton passed to him to take over. Well, Islam did that. It took a couple fights past Habib retiring for Islam to get that title shot, but got the title shot, won, had a couple of defenses, then has now moved up in weight class and has etched his name in history again as the 11th double champion in UFC history. So again, I ask you the question, just how good is Islam Makhachev? Just like that, though, folks, we're going to wrap the show up with one more segment here. We have 3 rounds. Get him on the board here. Danny Bailey, my man. What do we have?
UFC President Dana White announced that Dillon Danis has been banned from future UFC events following the melee at UFC 322. What are your thoughts?
For this one, I'm actually surprised that he went so far as to say that Dillon is being banned. Now, I understand why, because Dillon is a highly problematic person. This is now multiple brawls that he's been involved in at UFC events. If you remember back to UFC 229, that was the Conor and Habib fight. Well, who was the guy that Habib hopped the cage to go and attack? Dillon Danis. Manager to Islam and Habib, Ali Abdelaziz. A few cards later beyond that, who has a scuffle with Dillon Danis at a UFC event? Well, there's another example of it. Then this last weekend, that was a big brawl that happened at Madison Square Garden. And, Dillon is, he's a lightning rod for controversy. And where it makes me somewhat surprised is that because he is so controversial, I mean, he does do some numbers, but that could just be the UFC at this point saying, at what cost are these numbers coming? Jorge Masvidal had already been on record saying that, he was gonna go starch him or gonna go whoop his ass as soon as he saw him on site there at Madison Square Garden. But Jorge's also a little bit problematic in his own respects. And whenever Jorge is at a UFC event, what a lot of the public may not know is they position 2 security guards with Jorge at all times so that stuff doesn't pop off anymore. If y'all remember the infamous backstage incident where he gave Leon Edwards the 2-piece and a soda, or 3-piece and a soda, excuse me. That, along with the issue with Colby, that didn't happen at a UFC show, but we know what Masvidal's nature is. Self-proclaimed Miami goon. So they kept Danis away from Masvidal pretty well, but what they didn't factor in, and this is coming directly from Dana, was that, the first 5 rows was the entire Muslim Brotherhood there in support of Islam. And it was a lot of those same members of that Eagle camp that were involved in some of the other sequences, or just a lot of the dust-ups that camp has had through the years, one of them being John Pork, or Chanko, who... It's hilarious that his nickname became John Pork because of the way that it sounded like Islam said Chanko in that video with Mighty Mouse. And for the record, he hates the nickname just because he says, like the whole Muslim connection with pigs and pork and all of that, blah, blah, blah. But it's a catchy name that he was getting crowd chants at the presser, at the weigh-ins. He himself was getting entire crowds rallying for him, and he hasn't made his UFC debut yet. Earned his contract in the Contender Series this year, but he was a focal point of that brawl against Dillon Danis over the weekend. And, Zuba, you could see on camera, a few of the other guys that were just known members of that camp. Yeah, I'm not totally surprised that they're getting rid of Dillon or they're keeping Dillon out of the mix, but I also am kind of surprised in the sense that he is a lightning rod of controversy, and whatever he does do numbers, and also in the sense of he is the type of guy that people tune in for or they want to watch whenever it's him actually making the walk and competing, which has been a lot less than his dust-ups outside of the cage. But they tune in to watch him get his ass whooped. And the fact that he has that sort of polarity, I'm actually kind of surprised that they're completely 86ing him at this point. But then again, it's not going to be the first time if we see Dana walk something back.
More on Dana. Dana White claims Francis Ngannou physically accosted him. Another UFC official, quote, he's a bad guy, unquote. Any reaction?
I mean, it was a little surprising to hear the exact antics of how those discussions went, of Francis putting his hands on Dana, grabbing his shirt collar, or then grabbing Hunter Campbell, the head legal guy. I mean, Dana's right-hand man. But, I also told you that I think that it's not to say that Francis's public persona is a complete front, but at the end of the day, he is also fighter who made his way through some of the harshest circumstances, coming from the sand mines of Cameroon, going through human trafficking cartels, essentially, to be able to get his way to freedom, getting to France, then eventually making his way up and getting to the prominence that he is. So he's had to go through a lot of things and do some things to get to where he's at. And when talking about getting his money and some of those things, yeah, I don't know if this is a 100% completely true or a slight fabrication or dramatization of events, but said in the sense of Francis demanding things. Well, I do know that after that UFC fight against Stipe, or coming into that fight, it was an off record thing, or people in on background and in the fight world knew that Francis was getting a little bit full of himself. That was when he was first getting on to Sports Center for some of these appearances, and was getting a little bit high on his own press clippings, if you will. One of the things that Dana said was that he demanded that as soon as that fight is over, that he has a private jet booked for him to go back to Paris. Dana just kind of laughed like, huh, yeah, okay, kid. And then in that first fight, he got completely dominated by Stipe and had to eat a little bit of humble pie in the process. I'm not going to sit here and say that Francis is, this bad guy in the way that Dana does, because that's the bad blood of them, with promoter to athlete and all of the ensuing events, with Francis leaving, sitting out past the championship clause in his contract and all of that. But I think that there's probably a little bit of truth on each end of the story.
Jake Paul set to face Anthony Joshua next month. What are your thoughts on the new match for the Problem Child?
I got to give credit to Jake. Got to give credit to Jake to actually fighting somebody who is of size, who is of relevance, who is of that high degree championship level caliber. This might be the fight that you have all been trying to watch Jake Paul get smoked in. Now, being fair, yes, Jake has grown his skill set tremendously. He has improved and gotten better as a fighter. But Anthony Joshua is a legitimate heavyweight world champion. You saw what he did to Francis when he fought Francis. Jake's defense and the video that his brother Logan Paul put up saying, like, what are you thinking? Jake says he's chinny. He's lost his chin. He doesn't have it anymore. Well, Jake better freaking hope so. Jake better hope that he lands that overhand in dispatches of Anthony Joshua early, because if this becomes anything other than that, it is a big problem for the problem child. Joshua has tremendously slick British boxing style, to where he can work behind his jab, he can use his footwork and his movement, find his angles, and then, also has the power to put you out. This is a vastly different dynamic of an opponent than him originally being scheduled to fight Tank Davis last week. He's now fighting again a guy who is more in his prime age, who is of size. It's going to be interesting to see how this one unfolds, and it is being contested as a true sanctioned bout. This is not an exhibition. This is a fight that will go on both men's record. How do you guys foresee this one going? But just like that, folks, we are all out of time with another week of original combat sports programming here at the MMA Plug. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in with us each and every week. Please like, share, and subscribe wherever it is possible here for us directly, as well as for the Mile High Sports Network. If you have the opportunity to come down here and check out the scene at the number 38, there's ample TVs around, great food. You can come and watch Denver sports, which are, again, on a tremendous roll right now. You can pick up your merch. We have a vending machine with stuff to be available for you on demand. Want to give a big shout out to my man, Danny Bailey, holding it down for me every week behind the glass. And again, folks, we'll be back with you next week, same time, same place. I'm Jordan Kurtz. Give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. This is the MMA Plug presented to you by Mile High Sports.